doesn't love a good grown-up joke? And we're not necessarily talking about rude jokes here. We're talking about any sort of gag that is inappropriate for children. Whether it's risque or just plain dark, we've compiled a list of 10 adult jokes that you never caught in Marvel movies. Let us know what your favorites are, and remember to slam that red button to subscribe to Screen Rant for more content. And before we get started, can you guess what movie these emojis are representing? Guardians of the Galaxy. Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy isn't exactly subtle with its humor. It's less Black Mirror and more pie in your face. That doesn't mean Guardians is dumb though, because they fit in an old art reference. When talking about the women he brings back to his pad, Peter Quillen, aka Star-Lord, as played by Chris Pratt, said that if he had a black light, his ship would look like a Jackson Pollock painting.
This would look like a Jackson Pollock painting.
It is adult because it's rude and adult for the reference. Jackson Pollock is a painter known for his very splashy style. We're not art critics, but his paintings are typically alive with color and usually comprised of various colored splatters. The joke wasn't even originally going to be in the movie, but James Gunn thought it so funny that he filmed extra shoots to try to get it in, the whole time being fully aware it might get cut by Disney. Surprisingly, the joke made it into the final cut. Despite it being a sex joke, James Gunn wasn't even asked if he minded taking it out. We can only imagine that the joke was so subtle that Disney and Marvel's execs might not have noticed it.
That's a good boy, Anthony.
Ant-Man. Ant-Man is an unusual movie, taking a similar comedic approach to Guardians of the Galaxy, but using the same formula as Iron Man. Ant-Man quickly became a fan favorite. That being said, it did have a pretty dark joke. If you weren't looking carefully enough, you might have missed it. When Hank first shrinks down, he is confronted by a giant, well, compared to him anyways, mouse. It starts to chase him as he runs towards a mouse trap. He jumps up onto it and is sprung into the air and out the window. What you might not have noticed due to the speed of the camera pan is that the mouse is definitely hit by the mouse trap, and that just makes it kinda sad. That being said, this is the same movie that made us weep for the untimely passing of Anthony the Ant, who gives up his life in the line of duty. Thankfully, the rest of the movie, which still has shades of Edgar Wright's witty style, is fairly lighthearted, except for the sheep that gets liquidized. You know what? No, we take it back. Ant-Man is a dangerous movie for God's precious little creatures. Spider-Man. When Sam Raimi adapted Spider-Man to the silver screen, the decision was made to abandon the web shooters in favor of webbing being one of Peter Parker's superpowers. This was a change that a lot of fans really hated, although it changed relatively little about the character outside of not showcasing Peter's intelligence, as the web shooters were originally created by Peter to show off his scientific genius. What it's most useful for, though, is making jokes that aren't for little kids' ears. When Aunt May is trying to talk to Peter, she catches him while he's testing out his webbing. He's making a huge mess, and when May pokes her head around the door, it certainly looks a little suspect. This exact joke is repeated in multiple interpretations of Spider-Man, including the multiple animated series like The Spectacular Spider-Man. It's also repeated again in The Amazing Spider-Man with more or less the same setup. It's a pretty easy joke to make, as Peter Parker's becoming Spider-Man and accepting of responsibility is often seen as the story of a boy becoming a man. Maybe this isn't the side of men that we really want to see repeated quite so many times, though. X-Men 2. It's no secret that the X-Men comics have largely been used to talk about discrimination. While Stan Lee claims it to be his idea, Chris Claremont really explored the idea of civil rights in America through the X-Men. By the time the X-Men movies came out, the current debate in America was over the equal rights for gay people. While it wasn't quite as seamless as analogy as race, Bryan Singer shot several points in the movie with this analogy in mind. It's most notably in X-Men 2 when the X-Men travel to Bobby, aka the Iceman's parents' house. The parents, who were previously unaware that Bobby was a mutant, ask, "Have you tried not being a mutant?" While it's a little on the nose if you have pre-existing awareness of the X-Men and their relationship with real-world civil rights, if you're the sort of person that only watched the movies for fun and weren't too familiar with the comics, it's a mature joke that could fly right over your head. It's not the only time the X-Men movies make the connection, as Charles Xavier and Magneto were treated like a former gay couple, at least by the director. It was never officially canon. Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen, while not a gay couple, have kissed on several occasions in celebration and promotion of gay pride. Iron Man 3. Iron Man 3 is one of the Marvel Cinematic Universe's darkest movies. It's a film that deals heavily with adult themes like post-traumatic stress. Thanks to Tony Stark's near-death experience in the Avengers, as well as having some socio-political commentary on the War on Terror. So it's no surprise that there are some very adult themes in the movie. Surprisingly though, today's sneaky adult jokes come from one of the more lighthearted aspects of the film. Tony Stark befriends a young boy over the course of the movie. The kid works hard following Tony's instructions, and it's safe to say that the day couldn't have been saved without him. That being said, he is still only a little kid, and he has a bedtime. How does Tony Stark keep the kid awake? By giving him caffeine pills and telling him it's candy. We see this when the boy is following Stark's instructions on the computer. It's late at night and Tony checks how many of those sweets the kid has been eating. He says he's on his second bowl. Tony asks if he can see straight, and there is a quick cut to show a bowl full of caffeine pills. On the upside, the kid got a sweet workshop and a potato gun out of it.
Oh!
Deadpool. Unless you're a kid who's very into 60s comedy, you probably have to be an adult in order to be aware of the Four Yorkshire Men, a 1967 sketch from the British TV show At the Last of the 1948 Show, performed by Tim Brooke Taylor, John Cleese, Graham Chapman, and Marty Feldman. The sketch concerns a group of, you guessed it, four Yorkshiremen as they talk and reminisce about their tough childhoods. As the sketch goes on, they tell increasingly more elaborate and unconvincing stories before finally all agreeing that if you tried to tell the young people of today what they went through, they just won't believe you. The sketch was later redone by Monty Python, of which Chapman and Cleese were members, and it was redone again by Alan Rickman, Eddie Izzard, Harry Enfield, and Vic Reeves for charity in 2001. It has been reworked multiple times since. So why are we telling you all of this? Well, the scene in which Wade Wilson and Vanessa first meet, comparing stories of their awful childhoods revolving around abuse, assault, and more, is a direct, intentional reference to the classic sketch. Deadpool was full of those little references, including actor Ryan Reynolds' previous films like The Green Lantern and Blade 2. And speaking of which, Blade 2. If you were a kid reading Anne Rice novels or watching movies based on her work, you probably shouldn't have. What's wrong with you? One of the subtler adult references with Blade 2 was its wry commentary on the way vampires have been taken far too seriously in mass media. Specifically, it mocked the sweeping gothic romances of Anne Rice's Interview with a Vampire series. In the House of Pain sequence, the aristocratic fancy vampires struggle to successfully mingle with the riffraff at an undead disco. At no point do they ever look like they're enjoying it. While it's something that not many people would immediately latch onto, the whole thing was intended as a dig at the pretentiousness of over-serious vampire movies around at the time. Blade 2 was directed by Guillermo Del Toro, a director who was very genre-aware, having worked not only on his own serious gothic tales such as Crimson Peak and The Devil's Backbone, but also action-packed movies like Pacific Rim and Hellboy. To put it simply, Del Toro understands comic book movies. He understands the gothic, and he understands how to balance it appropriately. So it comes as no surprise that the more satirical Blade movie is the one that he directed. The Avengers. Joss Whedon is pretty knowledgeable when it comes to really old stuff. The guy wrote Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel over the course of 10 years. So it should come as no big surprise that the dude is pretty specific when it comes to his references. When Loki is captured by the Avengers and Black Widow confronts Loki about controlling Hawkeye's mind, Loki gets a little annoyed. During what can only be described as a rant, Loki calls Natasha Romanoff many things including a mewling quim. It's an unusual insult, and it's not one that we'd expect anyone to get. Although if you do know what it means, it's a pretty vulgar insult.
This is my bargain, you mewling quim.
Quim is a pretty outdated term for ye olde times for a woman's private area. It's a little more than just general slang though, it's actually an outright curse. That's right, Joss Whedon and Loki managed to drop the old-fashioned equivalent of the C-bomb without anyone noticing. As a matter of fact, when asked about it in an interview on Whedon-esque, he said it was one of his greatest achievements. You know what the best part is? It's not the only time Joss has used a ridiculously outdated piece of trivia for the sake of a joke, but we'll get to that later.
Hey, come on, don't think you're being shut out.
Howard the Duck. If ever there was a character more deserving of a reboot in the MCU, it's Howard the Duck. While he's already portrayed by Seth Green in cameos of Guardians of the Galaxy, we think it's high time that Howard and Seth got their own movie. Any which way, it would have to be better than the original movie. Howard the Duck is a movie that just didn't know whether it wanted to be a kid's film, given its U rating in Britain, or an edgy comedy, given its PG-13 rating in the United States. He smokes, reads gentlemen's magazines, and drinks alcohol. Yet none of that is quite as shocking as the brief few frames near the beginning of the movie, in which, while Howard is crashing through his neighbor's wall, don't ask, we get a brief flash of his duck neighbor's duck breasts. The biologically aware will know that birds do not have mammary glands, which means that this sneaky little joke existed only to confuse and disturb us. Well, it worked, to say the least. So, what do you say, Marvel? Maybe we could give Howard the Duck a second and hopefully less creepy chance? Avengers, Age of Ultron. We said we'd come back to Whedon, and here we are. One of the great strengths Whedon has as a writer is taking an outlandish situation and grounding it in reality. An outlandish character like Thor is someone we could usually only imagine doing crazy things, but Whedon asked the question, what would Thor do for fun if he were real? The question is answered in Age of Ultron, in which mid-chill-out session, Thor says whoever lifts Mjolnir wins can have his kingdom. Tony Stark is the first to step up to the plate for the sake of the joke. In addition to saying he will be fair but cruel as a ruler, he also says he will be reinstating Prima Nocta if he's successful in lifting Thor's mighty hammer. What is Prima Nocta? Well, it's a supposed legal right for noblemen to have sexual relationships with their subordinate women. Despite it being creepy in concept, there is no historical proof of the right being exercised prior to its abolition in the 1400s. It's undoubtedly a pretty dark, mature joke for those of sensitive disposition, but it's also perfectly befitting of the swaggering womanizer that is Tony Stark. Well, that's all we have time for today, but before you go, be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe for more content like this. Leave us a comment and let us know if we missed any of your favorite jokes that were in the Marvel movies. Thanks for watching. Oh, and the answer to our emoji quiz is...